My family called me a failure until the general stood, saluted, and said, "General Hale." My mother once told me not everyone is meant to be exceptional, Evelyn. She said it gently, over coffee, as if she were handing me a soft truth. I was 19, freshly commissioned, wearing my first uniform like armor. She didn't mean to hurt me, but her words left a bruise that never quite faded. From then on, I faded myself. I didn't talk about deployments. I mailed home polite updates, never details. At every family gathering, I watched as my sister Nora shined, her every step celebrated. When she graduated, they held a party. When I returned from Afghanistan, they forgot to unlock the front door. I stayed quiet. Even when they cropped me out of the family photo, I said nothing. I'd survived worse than indifference. Until that day, when I sat quietly at the back of her promotion ceremony, and a four-star general walked in, scanned the room, and stopped. He saluted. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm. "General Hale." The whole room fell silent. For me, I was born into discipline. My crib sat beneath my father's framed Air Force medals. My lullabies were cadence calls from Fort Brenton's morning drills. In the Hale family, loyalty wasn't taught, it was inherited. My father, Colonel Richard Hale, had the voice of command even at the dinner table. My mother, Margaret, a former combat nurse, spoke less but carried the weight of 100 field hospitals in her silence. I was the firstborn, the prototype. From the age of 7, I knew how to shine my shoes and salute with precision. By 15, I had memorized the chain of command better than the periodic table. When I received my acceptance letter to Westbridge Military Academy, my father beamed in a way I'd never seen before. "You'll carry us further than I ever could," he said. I believed him. My sister Nora was always the softer one, clever, charming, a natural leader, but without the weight of expectation. I used to tie her braids before school, pack her lunch when Mom was deployed. We were close in that unspeakable way siblings sometimes are, bound not just by blood, but by knowing who watched you fail and never turned away. Westbridge was a storm. I was sharp, capable, but not immune to the grind. The hours broke something in you, stripped away softness, but I didn't quit. Then came the second semester. A scandal erupted, an encrypted phone found in a shared locker, unauthorized comms tied to an overseas leak. It wasn't mine, but Nora's name was buried deep in the trace logs. Through a careless forwarded text she hadn't meant to send. She was still in high school, but had visited me weeks earlier, used the terminal to message a friend. If the investigation followed the trail, it would swallow her whole. That night, I met with a man in a dark suit and a darker office. He was from military intelligence. He offered me a choice: resign publicly and quietly join an unlisted intelligence program, or watch the inquiry unfold. I signed the form the next morning. My father said nothing for weeks. When he finally spoke, he just asked, "Why didn't you endure?" I didn't answer. Couldn't say I did. The next 5 years disappeared into shadows. No medals, no parades, just code names and midnight flights, missions that erased themselves after impact. I saved diplomats, smuggled out scientists, pulled agents bleeding from alleys no map dared name. I saw things that shredded my sleep, but every time I felt hollow, I remembered Nora, safe, thriving, and it anchored me. Once I returned home for a weekend, Nora was graduating with honors from officer training. At dinner, someone asked me what I did. I said, administration. The table nodded and moved on. I didn't mind. I had chosen this path. I had chosen invisibility. Nora hugged me that night and whispered, "You're still my hero." I smiled. And that was enough. Until it wasn't. Years passed, missions blurred. Nora became a rising star in the officer corps, her name appearing in newsletters, base announcements, proud Facebook posts by my mother. I clipped each mention, quietly, storing them in a folder I kept between classified maps and encoded reports. I never missed her milestones, even if I wasn't in the photos. There were moments when I wanted to tell her everything, like the time I landed at Andrews for a 2-hour debrief and saw her across the tarmac. I almost called out. But what would I say? Hi, it's me, your ghost of a sister. I just helped extract a diplomat from hostile territory. No, that wasn't how our family worked. Glory had to be seen to be believed. Still, I watched from afar. When she struggled with a tough deployment, I anonymously arranged for a morale package to be delivered to her team. When our father fell ill for a week, I had food sent to the house under a generic veterans fund name. Never wanted praise. I just wanted to protect them from the world, from shame, sometimes even from themselves. But each year, the distance widened. I became the one who left. And the more I let them believe it, the less they asked. Love in our family had always been conditional, earned through endurance, proven by visibility, and had neither. But I still had Nora's old letters, scribbled notes from when she was 14, dreaming of command, calling me Cap'n Evie. I kept them in my locker, folded beside the lanyard I wore during my first deep cover mission. Sometimes, on long flights back from hostile zones, I'd reread those notes and whisper, I'm still watching over you. I never imagined she'd one day try to erase me completely. The first signs were small, so small they could be mistaken for forgetfulness. One year, I sent home a birthday card for my father with a hand-stitched patch from an old unit he'd admired. No reply. A week later, Nora posted a photo of him holding a commemorative plaque she'd sent with the caption, Dad's favorite gift. Mine wasn't in the frame. Maybe it wasn't even opened. At holiday dinners, they'd ask about Nora's latest training, her commendations, her pending deployments. When they'd turn to me, it was with polite confusion. You still doing admin stuff, my uncle once asked, between bites of turkey. I nodded. No one asked for more. Once I drove 10 hours home for Thanksgiving. My name wasn't on the place cards. I ate standing up by the kitchen sink, watching as Nora's fiance took the seat I'd once occupied. No one noticed. The walls of our house had become shrines to everyone else. Portraits of Nora in full dress uniform, framed certificates, group photos from base graduations and field exercises. I scanned the walls looking for a trace of me. The only one left was from my high school ROTC days. Faded, tucked in the hallway by the laundry room. My mother used to write weekly emails. Over time, they dwindled to monthly texts. Then, silence. I still sent flowers for her birthday, notes for anniversaries. When I asked if she got them, she replied once, yes, they were fine. That was it. I tried not to let it sting, but it did. There was one summer I came back on a brief leave. I wasn't in uniform, just jeans, boots, a plain blouse. I knocked, waited. My father opened the door, looked surprised. You didn't tell us you were coming. His tone wasn't angry, just blank, like my presence was a scheduling hiccup. Inside, Nora was home too, on official leave. Her arrival had been met with a barbecue, family flown in, banners in the backyard. Mine was met with microwave leftovers and a borrowed blanket for the couch. That night, I overheard my parents speaking in the kitchen. My mother's voice. She could have been something if only she hadn't quit. My father replied, she chose her path. Nora made something of hers. They weren't angry, just resigned. The hardest part wasn't being forgotten, it was knowing they didn't even think there was more to know. I never told them about the time I guided a wounded operative across the Syrian border for 4 days without backup, or when I called an airstrike on a weapons depot while pinned behind a crumbling wall praying the coordinates were right, or the time I declined a medal because accepting it would require appearing in a photograph I couldn't risk being seen in. All that lived in silence. Once a distant cousin saw me at a family wedding and said, "Didn't you leave the military?" Before I could reply, another relative added, "No, I think she works in a VA office now or something." I smiled. It was easier than explaining. But the moment that truly fractured me was this. My mother posted a photo collage titled, "Our Pride in Uniform." It included Nora, our cousin Caleb, even a neighbor's son who'd done basic training. I wasn't in it. I didn't ask why. I already knew. Even in casual conversations, I became a footnote. At a family reunion, someone introduced me as Nora's sister, not by name. When I corrected them gently, they smiled, as if that fact didn't really matter. There was one winter when I sent a package, handwritten letters, sand from a deployment site, and a pendant I'd kept from my first covert mission. It came back unopened. No one recognized the return address, my father said over the phone, as if that explained everything. Nora once gave a speech at a local veterans event. I tuned in online, curious. She spoke eloquently about sacrifice, resilience, service. She named mentors, teammates, even a high school PE coach. She didn't mention me. I wasn't angry, I was tired. Tired of folding myself into shadows just to keep their illusion intact. Tired of being the secret they pretended never existed. What broke me wasn't a confrontation or an insult. It was a life built entirely around omission. I'd become invisible, and worse, I'd let them do it. But silence has a weight, and one day, it would tip. It began with a manila envelope unmarked left on the desk of my temporary quarters. No note, no explanation, just sitting there like it belonged. Inside was a printout of an email. The subject line read, "Reckless Operations, Civilian Casualties." My name, Evelyn Hale, was in the body, accused of commanding an unsanctioned mission that led to multiple civilian deaths. The email alleged that my actions had been covered up, details buried in redacted reports, and urged an anonymous forum to expose the rot within. My heart didn't race, it froze. I knew that operation. I knew every detail. Operation Solstice, Syria, 3 years ago. It had gone sideways in the 11th hour. Intel was compromised, and I'd made a hard call, diverting air support to save a convoy carrying local children. 2 of my men died, but we got the kids out. There had been an inquiry, quiet, thorough, cleared me of wrongdoing. The records were sealed. Only 3 people had access to that after-action report: me, the supervising analyst, and 1 junior officer with limited clearance on a rotational assignment. That officer was Nora. She'd done a 2-week stint shadowing intelligence review at the Joint Ops Center. At the time, I thought nothing of it. She was advancing fast, moving into strategic roles. It made sense. But now, the wording of the leaked email was too precise, too specific. It quoted nearly verbatim from the classified report, phrases only someone who had read it firsthand would recognize. I confronted her the night of her promotion party. She was outside, on the phone, standing in the halo of string lights they'd hung for ambiance. I stepped into the glow and held out the printed email. Her face stiffened when she saw it. "Did you send this?" I asked. My voice was even, quiet. Not an accusation, just a request for truth. She didn't flinch, yes. I didn't speak. She kept going. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I just wanted you gone. You left, you disappeared. And still, they talked about you like you were better than me." I said nothing, let her fill the silence. "I've done everything right," she whispered, voice cracking. I stayed. I followed every rule. I built a path from scratch, and yet, all it took was one salute, and you erased me again. There it was. Not hatred, not spite, envy, the bitter, quiet ache of never feeling enough, especially next to a myth. She looked at me then. "You weren't supposed to come back." I could have raised my voice, could have thrown the folder at her feet and walked away, but instead, I said the only thing I could. "You set fire to my name, hoping it would make yours shine brighter." She flinched. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced the floor of my guest room, that envelope still in my hand, my past being dissected by strangers and secret threads. If that email gained traction, my clearance could be revoked, my team assignments lost. Worse, my legacy dismantled. And yet, what hurt most wasn't the threat to my career, it was that she had chosen to become my enemy without ever asking for the truth. The next morning, the base activated, a security protocol classified breach detected. An encrypted file connected to Operation Solstice had surfaced online. Forensics traced the leak to an inactive device, one that had once been assigned to me. I was summoned, questioned, asked to surrender. 6 months of personal comms. I complied, and then I dug. With access to internal metadata, I traced the email chain back to its relay source. The pattern was erratic, almost sloppy. A backup server had been triggered, a dormant node I hadn't touched in years. But someone had. And in doing so, they'd unintentionally attached a dormant classified file. It wasn't malicious. It was careless. A mistake. And when I ran the login history through decryption layers, the source became clear. Nora, she'd accessed the comm station 2 days earlier, left her credentials open overnight. The timeline matched. The path of the email, the file attachment, the upload. Her digital footprint stained every byte. I didn't confront her again. I didn't need to. She'd already sentenced herself. The next 24 hours blurred into a storm of silence, strategy, and suppressed fury. I wasn't under arrest, but I was under watch. General Hammond, my longtime mentor, didn't speak a word of judgment, but the look in his eyes was enough. You need to clean this up now. He authorized me to lead the internal probe. Technically a breach of chain, but tactically smart. No one else had both the clearance and the personal stake. I worked alone. Through fragmented log trails and cross-checks, I confirmed what I feared. Nora hadn't meant to leak the file. She'd accessed my old backup directory to verify her suspicions, likely looking for more proof of my operations to discredit me. But in doing so, she'd triggered an old auto process, one tied to my legacy clearance. That process scooped up everything, including a top-secret file, and sent it off with the email. Derek Lorne, a former strategist with a grudge against me, had been waiting. He'd created a bot to watch military backchannels for metadata anomalies. When the file surfaced, he acted it as a whistleblower leak and submitting it to an underground blog. Derek had always hated that I overruled him in Mosul, refusing to bomb a zone filled with civilians. He'd called me soft, said I didn't have the guts for leadership. Turns out he had the guts to sabotage it from the shadows. I had both of them now, the sister who envied me and the rival who preyed on that envy. At the final internal hearing, I laid it all bare, every login, every timestamp, every chain of error and intention. The officers in the room went still when I concluded. The breach was not espionage, it was ego, misplaced, unspoken, and deeply human. Nora sat across from me, white-faced, motionless. I wasn't looking for revenge, just recognition. She looked down, then signed the admission, full responsibility for initiating the unauthorized chain that enabled a national security leak. It would cost her 5 years of promotion eligibility, but it would cost me more. I had to bury what was left of our trust, not for country, for myself, because sometimes the sharpest betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the hand that once held yours in childhood. And that wound takes the longest to cauterize. The hearing was over, but the silence that followed was deafening. Though I was officially cleared, the whispers never ceased. They trailed me like shadows through every corridor, every mess hall, every late-night briefing. Doubt clung to me like a second skin, suffocating any hope of peace or acceptance. I wandered the base like a ghost, my uniform feeling heavier with every step. Nights offered no rest. Memories of those I lost on missions haunted me, the soldiers who never returned, the civilians caught in crossfire, and the family who never truly welcomed me home. Isolation settled deep inside, I spent hours in my sterile guest room, surrounded by beige walls and the hum of fluorescent lights. The monotony was a prison, and I questioned everything: my worth, my purpose, even my will to continue. There were moments I nearly gave in. I thought about walking away, not just from my role, but from it all, from the betrayals, the silence, the constant ache. The quiet was louder than any battlefield, louder than the gunfire. But then a flicker of light pierced the darkness. I remembered the soldier I once held, his hand, weak but grateful in mine as we waited for medevac, the weight of his trust, the raw humanity in those moments that made all the suffering bearable. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I found myself alone near the training grounds. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a promise of resilience. I whispered back, a vow to fight on, to reclaim my story. The road ahead was uncertain. I was broken, yes, but not defeated. Weeks passed, and the emptiness ebbed and flowed. Friends reached out, their voices bridges to a world I struggled to rejoin. I accepted invitations, but kept my heart guarded, fearful of the gulf between who I was and who they thought I should be. I wrote, pouring my pain into journals and letters I never sent. They became my refuge, a way to hold on to the parts of me that still mattered. Sleep remained elusive, dreams dragged me back to battlefields and impossible decisions, where the faces of lost comrades blurred with moments of failure and hope. Letters from Nora stopped arriving. Our silence grew heavier, a chasm neither dared cross. Some days, the weight of the past pressed down so hard I thought I might crumble. But in those darkest moments, I found unexpected strength, sometimes in a smile from a fellow soldier, sometimes in the quiet resolve of those who depended on me. Then one unexpected call changed everything. General Hammond's voice came through the line, steady, urgent. "We need you. There's a mission only you can lead." In that moment, I remembered who I was beyond the scars and betrayals. The soldier, the leader, the woman who refused to be erased. I took a deep breath and said, I'm ready. Because sometimes, even when you feel lost, the call to fight is louder than any fear. After the call from General Hammond, something inside me shifted. A fragile ember reignited beneath the ashes of doubt and despair. I returned to work not as the ghost who had wandered aimlessly, but as a soldier determined to reclaim her story. The mission was daunting, unraveling webs of deception, rebuilding trust, shattered by betrayal, but I was ready. I assembled a team from across the military's intelligence and cyber command units, individuals whose skills complemented my own. Among them was Nora, the same sister who had sent that devastating email, now sat silently beside me, her gaze downcast, shoulders tense. The weight of our past hung between us like a storm cloud, but the task ahead was too critical to allow old wounds to derail us. Days turned into weeks. We combed through encrypted files, cross-referenced access logs, and traced data trails hidden in the labyrinth of military networks. Every discovery was a double-edged sword, exposing new fractures but also clearing the fog of suspicion, clouding my name. Nora's contributions, though quiet at first, became invaluable. One evening, after a particularly long day of sifting through lines of code and system traces, she finally broke the silence. "I never wanted this," she whispered, voice heavy with regret. "I was afraid of being invisible, of always standing in your shadow. I thought if I could make you disappear, maybe I'd finally be seen." Her words, raw and vulnerable, cracked the armor I'd built around my own pain. It was the first true admission from her, not just of guilt, but of the loneliness that had driven her actions. It didn't erase the past, but it opened a door, tentative and narrow, towards understanding. Then came the breakthrough. Our security AI flagged a dormant trobes embedded deep within a logistics archive, a piece of malicious software sleeping quietly for years. The timestamp matched the time I had clashed with Derek Lorne, a former strategist known for his hardline tactics and bitter resentment toward me. His refusal to accept my cautious approach in Mosul had branded me as weak in his eyes. The malware had remained undetected until Nora's access inadvertently triggered it. Coordinating with tactical units, we executed a swift raid on the decommissioned data relay station where Derek had been hiding. The operation was clean and efficient. Derek offered no resistance, his resignation evident. At interrogation, Derek confessed with cold clarity. His grudge against me had festered into obsession. He had engineered this entire scheme to exploit the cracks within our family, counting on Nora's moment of weakness to ignite a scandal that would end my career. The revelation was as painful as it was liberating. The enemy wasn't just an outside force, it was internal, born of envy and vengeance. With Derek detained and Nora's full confession, the investigation drew to a close. Nora faced a formal reprimand and a suspension of promotion eligibility. The family's fragile bonds were forever altered, but a path forward had been forged. In the aftermath, I found an unexpected ally in Nora. Our shared experience forged a tentative truce. While forgiveness was not immediate, understanding and respect began to take root. She was no longer just my sister, but a colleague, a partner in mission. I began teaching a monthly course at Fort Brenton on asymmetric warfare, focusing on soft strategies and leadership under pressure. Nora never missed a class, sitting in the front row, her questions sharp, her challenges thoughtful. Sometimes she debated fiercely. Sometimes she listened silently, absorbing lessons both tactical and personal. Together, we navigated not just military strategy, but the delicate process of rebuilding trust. Between sisters, between warriors, the hardest battles are often fought off the battlefield, in the quiet spaces where pride, pain, and love collide. It is there, amid fractured relationships and harsh truths, that we find not only our enemies, but ourselves. And in those moments, I learned that resilience isn't just surviving the war outside, it's surviving the war within. The day of Nora's promotion ceremony arrived with a tension thicker than the morning fog that clung to Fort Brenton. The hall was packed with officers, dignitaries, and family members. Nora stood confidently at the podium, her uniform immaculate, ribbons gleaming under the harsh lights. She began her speech with practiced poise, words about loyalty, perseverance, and the sacred trust of the uniform. I sat quietly near the back, cloaked in the shadows but sharper than ever. The room was hers, or so they thought. And then the door opened. A hush fell over the crowd as General Hammond entered, his presence commanding immediate respect. He scanned the audience before locking eyes with me. He approached with steady steps and stopped directly beside my seat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice clear and resolute, "General Hale, it is an honor to see you again." The room froze. Nora's voice faltered mid-sentence. The applause that had been building died as all eyes turned toward me. The silence wasn't polite, it was stunned. I rose and returned the salute, not because I sought validation, but because I refused to be invisible any longer. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother's hand tremble as she dropped her water glass. My father, halfway to standing, slowly sank back down, as if trying to disappear into the chair. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Who was I really? What had they missed all these years? Later, in front of the assembled officers and family, I laid out the evidence. The leaked emails, the malware, Derek's confession, Nora's admission, each piece a puzzle revealing a truth they had long ignored or misunderstood. I spoke not with anger, but with measured authority. You judge me by what you thought I was, not by what I am. You chose to see only the surface, the absence, the silence, but I have been here. I have served, I have led, and I have survived. Nora stood nearby, visibly shaken but listening. The room's atmosphere shifted from shock to respect, the kind that commands attention without applause. This was not just my vindication, it was a rewriting of the narrative that had defined my family for too long. The aftermath was a quiet storm. Nora faced the consequences of her actions, losing promotion eligibility for several years. Derek was prosecuted. My family was forced to confront its blind spots, its biases, and the costs of unspoken resentments. Yet, amid the upheaval, something unexpected bloomed, a tentative reconciliation. Nora and I met in private, the years of tension dissolving into a conversation neither of us had dared to have before. We spoke honestly about fear, jealousy, and the desperate need to be seen. "I'm sorry," she said, voice thick with emotion, "for everything." I nodded, the weight of those words both heavy and healing. "I never stopped fighting," I replied. "And now, neither will you." Our family did not become perfect overnight, but for the first time, the walls between us cracked enough to let light in. I returned to my quiet work at the base with a renewed sense of purpose and a name finally acknowledged, not erased. Because sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones that reclaim your own story. And the most profound leadership comes from the courage to stand tall, even when the world has tried to keep you down. The dust settled, but the wounds left by betrayal did not heal overnight. The aftermath was heavy with silence, regret, and consequences that echoed far beyond the immediate. Nora faced the full weight of her actions. The formal reprimand stripped her of promotion eligibility for 5 years, a crushing blow for someone who had built her identity on ambition and achievement. The career ladder she had climbed so steadily suddenly seemed unreachable, the path ahead shrouded in uncertainty. Each day became a lesson in humility and reflection as she grappled with the reality of having harmed the very sister she once looked up to. Her reputation, once spotless, was now tainted within the tight-knit circles of the military community. Whispers followed her like shadows, and colleagues who once offered smiles now regarded her with guarded distance. The consequences were not just professional, they cut deep into the heart of who she was. Derek Lorne's downfall was even more dramatic. The man who had masterminded the digital sabotage, fueled by resentment and obsession, found himself stripped of rank, facing a court-martial, and ultimately imprisoned. His name became synonymous with treachery and betrayal. The strategist who once commanded respect became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how ambition twisted by bitterness can destroy everything it touches. Inside the Hale family, the cracks caused by years of silence and misunderstanding began to widen into a chasm. My mother, who had once worn stoicism like armor, started to show signs of softening. Her once sparse communications became more frequent and warm. Simple notes like "Are you eating enough?" or "Thinking of you" held the weight of apologies unspoken. In her quiet way, she tried to bridge the distance her silence had created. My father, too, began to confront his own blindness. Where once pride had made him deaf to the truth, now he spoke of me differently, quietly boasting to friends about his daughter's role advising top military strategists. It was a subtle shift, but one that meant the world to me, a public recognition I had long been denied. But the most profound change was in Nora. She sought not just forgiveness, but transformation. She immersed herself in learning, humbled by the hard lessons she'd been forced to face. Our monthly classes at Fort Brenton evolved from rivalry to moments of mentorship and collaboration. Slowly, the sister I had known began to emerge again, this time tempered by humility and a deeper understanding of honor. Still, some scars ran deep. Forgiveness was not immediate, nor was it guaranteed. Healing took time and patience. Trust, once broken, required more than words to rebuild. It demanded consistent, honest actions. I chose to create space for that growth, to allow the possibility of redemption, because the story was no longer about who had failed, it was about who was willing to rise from the ashes. And rise we did. Together, imperfect, wounded, but unbroken. Months after the storm had passed, I found myself standing once more at the old family house on the edge of Fort Brenton. The same house where I had spent a restless night years ago, before everything changed. This time I arrived first. I set the table with quiet care, took the seat at the head, the one my father had always claimed. When my family walked in, no words were exchanged at first. The air was heavy, but different now. It wasn't filled with accusation or cold distance. It held the weight of things finally being said. My mother held a dish wrapped in foil, her hands trembling slightly. Nora avoided my gaze, eyes fixed on the floor. My father's expression was unreadable, tired but softened by something I could not yet name. I didn't offer pleasantries. I didn't call this dinner an apology. I called it the truth. For the first time, I spoke openly about the path I had chosen. I told them I hadn't quit the service. I had been recruited into a secret intelligence program. I shared stories I'd never dared tell, the missions that risked my life, the times I stood between danger and the innocent, the moments I declined medals to protect secrets. Their faces shifted, surprise, disbelief, then something softer. My mother's eyes welled with tears. Nora stared at her plate. My father sat quietly, hands folded. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Why didn't you tell us?" I met his gaze. "Because you never asked, and I don't think you would have believed me." My mother murmured, "I thought those care packages you sent were apologies." I shook my head. They were reminders that I still existed. Then I slid across the table a manila folder. Inside was the email Nora had sent years ago, the one that nearly ended my career. "I didn't keep this to accuse," I said softly. "I kept it to show that words can be as deadly as bullets." No one interrupted. The room held its breath. I spoke with calm resolve. "I don't expect forgiveness, but if we are to move forward, it begins with seeing the person you chose not to see." Nora stood, walked over, and placed her hand gently on my shoulder. No words, just a touch that spoke volumes. My father rose slowly, walked to the old shelf, and picked up a faded family photo from long ago. A barbecue, laughter frozen in time. "This one's missing someone," he said quietly. "We'll take a new one," I replied. I didn't smile, not because I had forgiven everything, but because I no longer needed to carry the weight of pain. A month later, I returned to my work as a strategic advisor, teaching, analyzing, quietly shaping the future. Nora was there too, no longer a rival, but a student, and perhaps someday a partner. One evening, a young cadet stayed after class, nervous and uncertain. "Man, what's the hardest part of war?" I paused, then answered honestly. "Surviving without becoming a statue, not turning your wounds into weapons." Later, as the sun set in a golden haze, Nora handed me a small cake, plastic container scratched with 3 words in blue icing: General, Sister, Teacher. I didn't need applause or recognition. I needed only to be seen, not as medals or mistakes, but as the woman who had survived the quiet wars within. Life's battles don't always leave scars on the skin. Sometimes they carve canyons in the soul. Strength isn't always who shouts the loudest. Sometimes it's who chooses silence with dignity. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to stay, even when walking away seems easier.